I'm a third grade teacher here at Prairie Ridge in Cedar Rapids, Iowa, and I've been part of a Teaching American History grant called Bringing History Home since the start of the pilot in 2001. That pilot was done in Washington, Iowa, where I worked with both second and third graders, and during that time had some professional development in learning about how to teach historical teaching strategies to students. There are 5 main historical teaching strategies. One would be just basic content knowledge and teaching those through mainly read-alouds, fiction and nonfiction. There's also photo analysis and document analysis, where kids actually look at real historical photos and documents and then analyze those and use them then to help with that content knowledge and the background knowledge for the unit that they're working on. They do timelining, and in that timelining feature, it's not just about what they're learning about at that time and putting up some dates. Instead, it's taking those historical photos, documents, and things that they've learned about and putting those up on the timeline also, so they can see how things overlap in history. And giving that visual representation then also helps them be able to place other things on the timeline as we learn throughout our school year. It's interesting too because kids then start wanting to put their own things onto the timeline that they find in books or in reading or in math or in science or wherever it might be. So then it tends to then pull those cross-curricular things together for more understanding throughout our school day. We also use mapping, and mapping in a little bit different sense of not just cardinal directions but instead content knowledge. So for instance, that might be in the slavery and segregation unit that we do. We actually map out the northern states and the southern states, the Mason-Dixon line, and what happened in our country because of the way the things in history happened with the Civil War. How that affected the states, cause and effect type relationships. We leave that map up in our classroom actually for the entire school year and keep building upon that. So then we're doing the industrialization unit now, and so onto that map then we're putting the Transcontinental Railroad. We also have 3 major cities that we're focusing on throughout the industrialization unit, one being Lowell, Massachusetts, where we look at the textile industries there and how that affected that time period with the factories and the workers during then. We also look at Pittsburgh, Pennsylvania, which is a huge steel industry of that time, and then how the steel industry then created the cities to grow bigger and taller, as well as then that goes into the railroad. So we put the Transcontinental Railroad and the building of that onto the map also. And the kids then, the final one is Chicago, which is the meatpacking industry, and how then the railroad then ties into that meatpacking industry, as well as the different types of industry that was able to move things from different places in the United States during that time because of the railroad, because of refrigerated railroad cars, and then going to refrigerated trucks, and just how then that changed and grew the cities from that point on. So then we label all those things on the map also. We also put photos and documents on the map too, if it makes sense to go in there. For example, when we did our slavery and segregation unit, we put cotton fields and sugar cane fields and that on there so they could see exactly where the slaves were having to work within those fields and where that came about too. We also looked at where the Underground Railroad was at and how slaves would then try to escape from the south to the north and places that they might go. And we even put Canada on there because they had the fugitive slave law that then allowed, masters not to be able to go to Canada to make them come back to the United States, whereas if they were found in the United States, they could be taken back into slavery. So all those things kind of intertwine. The last of the historical teaching strategies is synthesizing, and it's where we try and pull all the strategies and all the history learning that they've done into one main project that they're doing. So it could be a simulation. Some of them are a project that the kids think of or come up with. Some of them are a story, like tell me the story of that time, which is what we're doing in our industrialization unit. So each few lessons that we do, then we break that down into a chapter, and they're actually making a chapter, a nonfiction chapter book, where then they also tie in their reading comprehension strategies of text features and put in a table of contents, a glossary, bold print words, there's a timeline in it, and they also then illustrate that story of how they've written it there. Another synthesizing project we've done is the kids have done historical documentaries on the program Photo Story, where we take then the different photo analysis that we've done and we put those all into the computer and put them into a sequence then where the kids then use that book that they've already written as their script, and then they tell the story of what happened during that time with the actual photos and documents on that also. So those are the 5 teaching strategies that you learn how to do through bringing history home. I have found that they have been an amazing tool for kids to learn history, but also to connect to all the other subjects of reading and writing, math, science. Everything fits together then, and I find that they are so excited about learning that they are going to the library and they're finding other books about what they're doing, and oh, I have a text-to-text connection and I have to show you this, and look at this book, and have you read this book? And actually I have found more good books to add to the units just by what my students have actually said, read this one next, or can we read this part to the class? So that's really helped. Then we added a piece this year. Each year I try and just go a little bit further with what I've learned since 2001 and say, okay, how can I make this be a little bit better? And that's just a strategy that all teachers do, is trying, once you've tried something, how could this be better the next year? So I went to a conference in Houston at the beginning of the school year, and a lady from the Library of Congress shared with me a thing called Books as Hooks. And so what she did was she took primary sources and showed the kids the primary sources before she read a book to them to get them interested and hooked on it. So I thought that was an interesting concept. So when I came back to my classroom, I decided I was going to try it, but we were working on reading comprehension strategy of inferring at that time, and so I decided to add that piece to it too. So I pulled different primary sources, both documents, photos, and a few artifacts too, and pulled those together, and the kids analyze those, and they have different pieces of paper that they do that on. It's mainly looking at who, what, when, where, why something's happening in a photo or in a document or in an artifact. So just thinking of those questioning strategies there, then I pull that into a document analysis, a photo analysis, an artifact analysis, so that each kid gets to see each of the documents, each of the artifacts, and then from there then they predicted as a small group what they thought that photo was going to have to do with, because I didn't tell them what book we were going to be reading or anything about it. I wanted to see what their background knowledge was on it first. So they made some predictions, and after then we predicted, then when I'm reading the story then, I stop at different places and I let the kids make connections or infer what those artifacts have to do with the story or the time period that we're talking about. I think it's the best way that I've ever taught inferring, because they completely understand, and it's very easy assessment for me to see who can make the connections and what their inferences are just by what they're saying. I've also found that kids that maybe had a difficult time doing it, once they've heard another student made a connection, they're like, oh, I've got something else I could add to that, or I can add on to that. And so just being able to talk those things out, it's made other kids who are more quiet and reserved be able to then share during that time too. So it's been a very successful project. This is my 19th year of teaching, and bringing history home has been the ultimate in my teaching experience, to be honest with you. It has caused kids to be able to learn more in my classroom than any other thing that I've ever taught or any other curriculum that I've ever used.